Hey folks, welcome to the Right in the Head podcast with me, John Paul Sperling. I'm a writer and a life coach. This podcast is where we bring those two worlds together, talking about the mindset required to turn the passionate pursuit of writing into a thriving career. Coming up on today's episode. Nick Roth is a screenwriter-director with over 10 years experience in the industry. Most recently, Nick wrote and directed the indie horror comedy movie Hanky Panky. Nick and I get into the often confusing subjects of film financing and distribution. Nick Roth, welcome back to the Right in the Head podcast for part 2. What has been happening in your world since the last time we spoke?
Oh my God, what hasn't been happening? No, I don't know. I'm a screenwriter by trade, and this is a time when being a screenwriter means sort of, as many of the screenwriters I know are doing, sort of cobbling together a lot of loose ends and odd jobs. I have a consulting on a pilot for a company in Singapore. I am
As you do.
working
Yeah.
on wrote a Lifetime movie. We're in rewrites on that. Me and a writing partner of mine. There's sort of a million little things still in development on a lot of things. Really excited. I can't talk about it, but I attached an actor to one of my pilots. That's not official yet. So, but like, there's
Okay.
lots of little tiny pieces, right?
Can you say which
Um,
pilot? Because
uh,
I know a few of your pilots.
you
Is
know,
it one?
it's called Tanked.
Oh,
Tanked.
really? That's
Yeah.
amazing. I love that script.
Attach an
Okay.
actor who's gonna try to package it and take it out at some point. So
Good.
there's
Good.
and little movements, sort of re up to shopping agreement on another pilot. None of these things are sort of concrete. None of them are money. None of them are a sale. Well, I guess hope but the script consultancy is a little bit of money, and the Lifetime movie will be a little tiny bit of money. But most of these things are just like moving the ball forward. Kind of feels like pushing the boulder up the hill, but it's I I wish I could just be, this is every screenwriter. I wish I could be just doing one thing. I wish I could just have one job. I guess if I was
Yeah.
staffed on a show or had a big script deal, maybe I could be. But I feel like my mind is split because I'm also speccing things, I'm writing, and I'm like, I got a couple pitches I still am in the middle of. Like, so there's just a million things at once. And so I'm a little frazzled by that. But I am uh, largely optimistic. Good segue into what we're going to be talking about, but largely optimistic about my career and the future of the
And there
industry.
I was wondering how we'd get onto the topic of
I did it.
today's discussion. You did it for me. We are talking about financing and distribution. And I'll start the episode with the same caveat I shared with you before we started rolling. I am an idiot when it comes to this kind of thing. I know almost nothing. I noticed that there's sort of within the industry an appreciable amount of confusion with these things, and there always has been. I think it's ramping up in terms of how confusing it can be. So where is that confusion coming from? Why is it such a messy situation? Why is it not just do ABC and get this end result?
I mean, I think there's been, look, caveat, I also am an idiot on this stuff. I have no, I mean,
That's the thumbnail now. Two idiots discuss
I've,
financing and distribution.
I don't think I've ever properly financed anything, gotten anything financed. And uh, I have had things distributed, but not like wildly successfully. I've worked on things that have like that, like when I worked on a TV show, that was, but I never touched anything around any of that part of it. But I'm a Hollywood news and all of that junkie. So I like it is something that I pay attention to and think about a lot. Um, and I guess the short version of it is, or maybe this will be the long version. I think a lot of things in the industry have not only been changing, but like the rate of change has been increasing with which they've been changing, right? If I'm trying to remember my high school calculus, the rate of change itself is changing. And ramping up. So there's little changes that have really adjusted the whole like world and market around like financing an independent film. Like one of those is that I think there used to be, so this is maybe over like 20 years ago or whatever, there used to be like a much more clear delineation between what was a studio project and what was a independent project. And so there was, if you were within the studio system, it looked a certain way. You pitched and then you developed in-house or whatever. And if you were independently financing, there was this other independent track. And we can talk about that in a second. But I think a big thing that's happened in features is that the studios have largely two things. One is there's this giant nebulous space between studio and independent, which is that all the studios own like an independent wing, something at Fox Searchlight and Sony Classics. It's like these are making independent films that are outside of Sony or Fox, but they're still kind of within it. And then the other piece is that, largely, and this is related to that, there's less development that happens in-house, right? Like, it's not like Universal is sitting around making all their films out of just like a bunch of writers and producers they have deals with, right? So increasingly, the studios enter the picture later, after the project has been more developed, right? So there are smaller production. There's more of these companies that are, often fronted by talent, like an actor or some producers who have deals with the studio, but they're not the studio. And they package all the way through. They've got the script and some talent, a director or whatever. Then they take it to the studio, right? And the result of that is it's a different model of how things get developed, and the studios are less hands-on, and that sort of is closer to and treads on like what's happening independently anyway, where companies are putting things together. And so like the gray area between this is an independent film and we're making it independent versus like we're an independent company that maybe has a first look deal with a studio. And so we package the whole thing, put the whole thing together, and then finance it from the studio side. That's also like been a gray area, right? Increasingly over the last 20 years. So that now, if you're trying to put a project together that's independent, like it's like at what point is it's independent all the way up until it's a studio movie, right? So it's like there's not the same like we're making an independent film and we're doing this route. It's like you just put together everything you possibly can, but that may still be a studio film at the end of the day. Like you could spec the script, have a producer attached, have actors attached or a director or whatever. And if you like that may be an independent film, that still may be a studio film, right? Like that I don't know what that, you know what I mean? So it's very much changed, I think, the landscape around what that looks like. And then last thing on my sort of, this is my overview and rant of what I think is the situation, is that then in the last couple years, and this is brand new, is that like all of the business models for how to value a project have been completely upended, right? This sort of starts with the streaming, the move to streaming and streaming bundles, and what is anything worth, and if everything is based on subscriptions, then you don't know the value of a project. But even a few years ago, it still felt like there was a world where that traditional independent route, which is that you put together as much of the project on your own, and then you take it to a film market, or a producer takes it somewhere, or festivals or whatever, to try to sort of pre-sell a project to get money for your project based on whatever you can. A friend of mine who's a producer described this to me once as like, you're trying to build a table with as many legs as you can to make it stable, right? And so like one leg is maybe you have a good script and maybe that gets good coverage. Another leg is you have an actor. Another leg is, whatever. Maybe you get a little bit of money someplace, then that becomes a leg, and you sort of are trying to build the most stable project you can until you can get it. And largely that looks like, a staple of independent film finance was always like pre-selling foreign rights. So you'd say, well, we think the movie is worth this much money. Maybe we can sell it to Germany for this much money. And you sort of build a hodgepodge of like, we'll get some money from here and some money from here and some money from here. We'll try, maybe there's cable rights or satellite rights or whatever. Right. And now my impression is that it's much, much, much harder to do that, or impossible. And partly because it's like there's so many places that have global rights, or that you're looking for, maybe eventually it goes to a subscription service, or maybe a studio is or an independent wing of a studio is going to come in at some point. And also nobody knows really how much anything is worth, because how do you monetize these things in an age when there's so much less money in cable rights and sort of bundling something that goes to satellite or cable or whatever, and most of it's online, and nobody knows how to make anything online, because it's like, how many sales are you going to get on Amazon, which is the biggest of the sort of the TVOD, transactional VOD platforms, right? It's like, but how do you even estimate how many people are going to pay $4.99 or whatever it is to rent your thing on Amazon? Like that's new. You don't know. Nobody knows. And then even more confusing is AVOD, advertising video on demand, where it's like, so how much is something worth on Tubi? And there are very complicated algorithms that say, here's the fraction of a cent you get for every ad that gets watched, but it's different on different projects and there's different numbers of ads per things. Like it's very hard to guess or estimate how much a movie is worth, right? Like that is the main thing that is the problem. And that makes it very hard to pre-sale things because who wants to invest? People typically they want to invest in a movie the latest they possibly can, right? So that means like the best time to invest in a film and give you money is you've got the movie and it's coming out and we'll give you money. I was able to raise money for my little tiny movie, Hanky Panky, only after I had finished the movie, sold it to a distributor, had a release date, and then some people were like, would you like some money for advertising? Because they could be last in, first out, meaning it's the least risky possible time to invest. The opposite of that, investing at the earliest is the worst time to invest, right? Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, risk is highest. Yeah.
Well, is there even going to be a movie out of it, right? So, just to finish, just to wrap that thought up, it's like I think the main problem is that the earlier investing is getting harder and harder because the models of estimating how much something are worth have been in all of these various ways disrupted, right? So it used to be, I have friends who work in features, right? And there used to be like, we can take all the sort of like facts about this movie, even if it's not made yet. It's just a pitch. We don't have a script, but we know if we have this, and this actor, this director, here's the genre, here's the runtime, it's rated PG-13, it's whatever. All these things that we know are sort of facts. We run it through some software that will predict the kind of money that it will make, right? And agencies used to do, like, still do this. Like they say, okay, if you have this actor, we think your movie is worth $3 million or whatever. It's getting more and more dubious to say what that is because it's that used to, I mean, yes, if you had a box office, you could kind of predict ticket sales, but the way movies make money is now so complicated that nobody really knows what they're worth, right? And if a movie goes on Apple or Amazon or Netflix and we never get the data on how many people watch it and it's just going into a library and there's no price affixed to it and it's just part of a larger subscription environment, how much is any individual movie worth, right? Like we don't know. And so no one has any idea what anything is worth, and that makes it harder and harder and harder to finance something earlier and earlier. So that is the formula I have for why there is true chaos in the with no real end in sight, but maybe one, but like, which I'll come back to later, I guess. But there is immense chaos on like trying to predict how to finance something, because how do you make the case that this is worth X amount of dollars when it's like, and maybe we'll sell it to an SVOD, we have no idea how much we'll be able to get for it, or we'll put it on AVOD, we have no idea what the rate of return on ads will be, or any, like, so it makes it very hard for like a bank to say, okay, here's $1.5 million, go make an independent film, or like even at the smaller end on like, 350 grand or whatever, Hallmark or Lifetime are spending on movie. You want to make a non-union film, you can make a movie for 300 grand, but how do you make 300 grand on a movie? If you're Lifetime, you have a whole model. You just put it on Lifetime, you sell ads, it's whatever. But if you're trying to make an independent film at that same kind of rate, how are you going to make 300 grand? I don't know. And I think the problem is nobody knows. That's what I think.
Is there something that writers should be doing even in the earlier stages of writing a project? Should they be bearing any of this in mind? Is there anything we can do to kind of anticipate this confusion? Let's just say that we know, or we have a strong instinct that this script is going to be an independently produced project. We would probably be looking for finance at some point. Is there anything we can do early on in your, and I want to tie this together with your experience with Hanky Panky, but in general, do you think there is anything that we should be concerned about? Or is it just keep writing and deal with this as and when it comes up?
That's a good question. That's kind of like the question I asked you last week, which was like, how much do you write for a marketplace? Not last week, last time I was on this podcast. How much do you write for out of passion versus how much do you write for a marketplace, and how do you try to do both? I mean, in the simplest form, and I guess what I try to do, and I don't, who knows if this is smart or not, but like I do try to think I am somewhat budget conscious when I write. Like I do try to keep that in mind, like uh, how much will this cost to shoot, and how can I make it so it doesn't just being aware of not making things egregiously expensive or things that
Like
will seem
space.
yeah, like setting something in space. Um
Yeah.
no, but just like, if I can do things in fewer locations, can I do things in fewer locations? If there are ways to sort of make it seem like at least this is budget conscious. I try to do that, but again, then sometimes you have to make something giant and period or sci-fi or whatever, and you can't. The other thing I would say is that like the biggest single thing that you have control over somewhat as the writer, right, is like that eventually you might be going like is cast. Eventually you might be going to actors. And so the thing that if anything gets you financing, if anything greenlights something, the single biggest thing is talent, right? I've talked to a bunch of producers recently, and I've heard this in, newsletters and podcasts in the world and stuff, is that like, you know, in many ways, even more than the sort of underlying IP or other facts about a project, like what actors you have determines the budget, determines the financing more than anything else. So, and this is the part that I think like doesn't interfere with your creative practice when you're writing, but like you want to write the best characters you possibly can, because that's the only, you want to write characters that actors will want to play, right? Because eventually if you're trying to attract an A-list star or two or whatever to your project, like your best bet at doing that, if you aren't coming with, as I'm assuming we all aren't, right? Coming with some valuable, you're not coming with Harry Potter, you know what I mean? You're coming with, I'm hoping this is a good script, and I'm hoping I want to attract talent by having it be a role that they want to play. Like that is so, and so that is a commercial side that I think doesn't interfere with the creative, because you should be writing good characters. You should be doing that anyway, right? But I think sometimes you write things and you have, as a writer, so many different things in mind you're trying to accomplish. Um, but like thinking about it from the perspective of some A-list actor who you give this to in the future now reads it and is only paying attention to, is this a role I want to play? And maybe they're paying attention to everything too, but primarily they're reading your script going, is this a role I want to play? Or it's their agent reading it and going, is this a role I think will be good for my client, right? Is this going to showcase something about them that is useful? Are they going to want to play it? Is it awardsy? Is it what is it about this, right? And I do that a little bit because I think you kind of have to. And sometimes my tendency is I'm always it's easy to do that with the main character, maybe because that you're so much with your protagonist, but you kind of want to look at like every role in your script and be like, at some point I'm handing this to an actor, and they need to have a reason why they're excited to do it, right? Especially like if you had all the money in the world, you just get whoever you want to have them do anything. But like what you're trying to do is at some point attract people to do a role that they want to do the role so bad, right? And so like I find that's useful in the rewriting process, is to go back and be looking at every character, fourth and fifth and sixth leads of the whatever it is, and be like, if I'm reading this as a prospective person who has to play this role, like what is the am I have I as a writer given them enough to do? Am I making it exciting enough to play this? Am I giving them fun things to do in every scene? Right? Because, and then if you're shooting it yourself, you get on the set, you don't want to have an actor just be sort of standing around and not have and feel like they're just set dressing, right? Like every actor has to feel like they have a lot to do in every scene, right? And so I think it's easy to not be thinking in that way when you're writing, but like in the process of writing something and rewriting it, I think that that's what I try to do a lot in the revision process, is make sure that if I was on that set, or if I'm handing this to an actor or an actor's agent to read it at some point, it's like, every role feels like they're going to be excited to do it for some
Yeah.
reason or another.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've learned to do via feedback on my scripts. I was always fairly good at writing a strong and intriguing protagonist and maybe the second lead, but it's those characters that are ultimately probably going to steal the scene with their one line, two lines of dialogue. They're not the main character, but they're I write mainly comedy, so it's that kind of quirky sidekick character that comes in once in a while. And making those interesting roles has been a real, to start with, a challenge and then a joy because it just lifts the whole script.
Yeah, and I will say that like working on a TV show was very good training for this because we did, I was there for 5 years. We did 100 episodes. It's like that's a lot of scenes, and you have a cast, and they're all real, and like they're human beings, and you know them, and so like if there's a scene where you know you give one person on the cast one line, like, and you get to the set, like you're fucked. Like you should not have, like that was a mistake. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that can't get through so you do sort of as a room always have to be paying attention to like, are we making this actor get dressed, go through makeup, come onto the set and just sort of be there, or have we done something for them? And that's different because but I think that it's a really useful, like just always having that in the back of your head somewhere, I think is really important from the perspective of like, it's independent and you're trying to get something financed. Like the most important thing is, who are the actors that you're attracting to do your project? And all of them, right? So
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a great way of looking at it, looking at who's this for, who would it attract, thinking through the step as much as you can. Of course, we can't predict exactly what's going to come of it, but having that initial, doing some research, maybe just having a creative session around, where it's going and who it might be attractive to. Is there anything that we could do to protect ourselves? Is that becoming an issue now with, I assume, distribution deals changing all the time, writers probably losing out? Is there something we can do to protect ourselves against that? Again, I'm an idiot. I don't know anything about this. I'm seeking to learn from somebody that probably knows a bit more about that than I do.
well, okay, so obviously they're related, but there's the financing world and then there's the distribution world, which are pretty different. Like, and I've now, I've had a bunch of my shorts distributed and one feature. And I think that like, if I were to do it again now in 2024, if I was sitting on a feature film and it was done, I think I would self-distribute it. And I mean, unless it's like, because unless you're going to one of the top 5 film festivals and you're going to win an award and you have an A-list actor, if you don't have any of that, you're not going to get a big slam dunk distribution deal from a big company, right? Like just period, right? And so short of that, I would say that like there are more and more interesting models for how you might be able to do this without a distributor altogether, because a typical distribution deal will look like here's how it used to work. It used to work that they would take your film and say, well, we're going to do everything. We'll market it. We'll put it out. We'll blah, 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 blah. And then we'll split the revenue with you. And then every company would never pay you a dime because they would just say, they would overinflate their costs and underreport their earnings. And then so everyone would get screwed. So then distribution companies moved into a model of more like, we'll get this out there for you, but we're not going to spend a lot of money. We're not going to advertise it. If you want to do that, you have to do it yourself, but we'll do a bunch of this grunt work for you. But we're still going to take a huge chunk of the profits. And that's kind of where it is now. So what I would suggest is there are ways of getting what most distribution companies will do for you now for flat fee rather than for large share of your profits, right? And what I mean by that is like graphic design and designing a marketing campaign, and you can go and get a third-party aggregator who will help you get onto platforms. You don't necessarily need a distributor to get onto a lot of these platforms. I'm talking about Amazon, Apple, Tubi, whatever. Like there are all these platforms you can get your project onto without a distributor, potentially. And so it's like, some of that is just how much am I willing to pay up front to get this thing onto platform and some of it, but then retaining more of the back end, right? And so it's hard for me to understand, and this is true of a lot of producers, I'm not just me, but it's hard for me to understand the value proposition of what most small distributors are now offering to independent filmmakers, which is we're going to take 30, 50 more percent than that of all of the gross money that comes in for like you got the whole film all the way over the finish line, and now they're going to do that. So and I could be wrong, and there could be great distributors who are doing this very effectively, but my feeling is like if you can do it yourself or do it for a low flat fee, do it yourself for a low flat fee, and retain more of the back end, and if you can build that into the budget ahead of time, right? So releasing a movie online, just the nuts and bolts of we need this kind of insurance, and we're going to have to go to this aggregator, and we got to go through this kind of QC, and we're going to do this. Maybe that costs $20,000, right? Like, and so if you factored that in, just like that's a cost we have up front, and it's a hard cost. Then when you get there, it's like, what is the distributor even for at this point? Unless it's a distributor who's also a financier who's also put money into it. What do you need a distributor for? I don't know what they're even doing at that point. Like if you say like we have money for a graphic designer, we have money for an aggregator who's going to put it onto the different platforms. I'm not really sure. And now like a big distribution company obviously is gonna be able to do things that you're not able to do for any dollar amount. If they have great relationships with places and can get your movie onto the homepage of Apple or what, I don't know. Like, so that's different. But what I suspect is that if you're listening to this podcast, you don't have a project that's going to get the attention. Like Paramount's not releasing your movie for you. You know what I mean?
I'd say that's fair. That's a fair assessment of our audience at the moment. Yeah.
So I don't like. If I was a distributor right now, I would feel like maybe my industry was in need of a shakeup or not long for this world, because I think a lot of I don't know how they make money. I mean, I don't know how they make money for much longer the way that they make money now. I'll put it that way.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting model, and it sort of reminds me of some of the smaller agencies I worked with when I was, more heavily focused on marketing. If you're a big ad agency, you have such capabilities. You can do things that no one else can do. You've got connections. If you're a smaller agency and all you're doing is offering to manage somebody's social media account for them, it got to a point where people started to say, I'm pretty sure I could do my own social media. It's kind of easy nowadays, and there's automation platforms that I can use. The technology has evolved. So a lot of smaller agencies died out because of that. Similar thing happening here, I think. I can see your point. Like at a certain point, you got the movie across the finish line, right? Like you said, what do you need this small distribution company for? Maybe the first time, so you learn from it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
you did this with. Talk us through this. I'm interested in this. So, to what extent you can, or you're comfortable with, talk us through what you actually did with Hanky Panky, because that has a distribution deal that's now out there. Talk us through that journey. I'm sure I would learn a lot from more of the details about how you actually did that.
In many ways, there's a lot of parts of it that were sort of like a surprisingly traditional route, which is that I met a sales agent. And I've worked with a couple different sales agents on other projects that I've been associated with, but I was sort of approached by a sales agent who, I don't know, heard about the movie, found out about the movie, and was just like, "What is this? Can you send this to me?" And I was like, "It's not done yet, but I'll send it to you when it's done." And I did, and he was like, "I love this. I think maybe I can get you a sale." Right? Interestingly, when I was making the film, and this is maybe something that I would think about differently also next time, that I've learned as a function of going through the entire distribution process, is that like I really wasn't thinking about how to sell the movie or how to market the movie fundamentally. I just wanted to make it. I wanted to make it as funny as possible and make the best movie I could. And I thought, but like with some eye towards like a marketplace, like we made it a horror movie because we were like, everybody says that you have a better chance of selling a horror movie than a comedy, which is still true. Right. There is a built-in audience a little bit. So like we were aware of the marketplace, but really the sort of nuts and bolts of those, I wasn't thinking about it that way. And interestingly, once it came to our sales agent bringing it to distributors and sort of negotiating deals with a couple different distributors and looking at their offers, these are all small companies. It's not big ones. It's not ones most people have heard of. Almost single-mindedly, the focus was on Seth Green. So Seth Green is a voice in Hanky Panky. He's a tremendous voice. He plays the villainous evil top hat. But he's not even in the movie,
right? Award-winning voice.
He's won best voice actor and best supporting actor from many small film festivals for his performance in Hanky Panky. Treasures it every time I hand him a certificate from one of these little festivals. It's very funny, and I mean, festivals but this is another reason why it matters to have festivals love giving. They just give the award to the most famous person in the festival, like a very high percentage of the time, because it benefits the festival if they can get Seth Green and his 1 point whatever million Instagram followers to post about their festival. That's better than they're ever going to get from everybody else. So like, he's won, not that he doesn't, he also deserves it. He's also great in it, but he's also won a very high percentage of, awards for a very small role. But I wasn't ever thinking I'm going to sell this movie based on Seth Green's name. He's my friend. He does a voice in the movie. And I think that was naive of me, because the only thing any distributors cared about was how involved Seth Green will be on social media. What's he going to do to help promote the film? Can we use his name? Nobody asked me any other questions about anything during the sort of, I was trying to sell this movie. No one gave a shit about anything except Seth.
Did they even know what the movie was about? They didn't care.
Nobody cared. I mean, they were all like, "We love your movie. It's so great. It's so funny." So here are our questions about Seth Green. So I had been a bit naive about that, and so I had to go back and talk to Seth a bunch of times and be like, "Hey, obviously I should have known this. Obviously you knew this was coming, but I need to ask you about all these things." And Seth was very cool, but also reasonable about being like, there's certain, like, he's not going to do a lot for a movie that he's just a voice in, but he also, we're all friends. His wife is also an actor in the movie, Claire Grant, who's great. So it's, he's down to do things, but he's like, the asks that everybody has from him are beyond what are reasonable, right? So there's been a lot of, it's not my favorite part of this whole thing, sort of the uncomfortable, like me having to go to Seth and be like, would you do this? And him being like, yes or no. And me feeling like, I should have seen that coming. And so I would see that coming more next time, which is that, when you're going, like, now when I write, there's one of the other things that floats in my head besides the budget and the actors and the whatever. Part of it is like, the only thing anybody's going to give a shit about when they're talking about how much money they're going to give me for this movie is what actors are in it and what they're going to do and what their social media, I think one of the things that we writers always bemoan is that, oh, they hired this person because they had so many social media people following, or, oh, it's terrible, they only hired this actor because they're this big on Twitter or whatever. But the other side of that I now at least understand better is, you're going out there and trying to get people to watch your fucking movie. It's so helpful if they've got a big social media following. And I am trying to get this movie out there, and I care. My friends did this movie for free, and I'm just trying. I want to help them. Like, it's not totally self-serving. It would be really like, if I'm trying to do a promotional thing, I got to just be like, okay, how many social media followers does this member of the cast have? Because how much am like, that is the only thing that the other side, the business side, the distributors, that is the only thing that they care about. Or in my experience, nobody asked any questions about anything else. So I think it's useful to be aware of that part of it from the ground up. I mean, and at the end of the day, you still got to just write the best thing you can. That can't be the only thing you're thinking about when you're writing. But I do think an awareness of that is helping me sort of be a little bit more strategic about the projects that I choose to, what I'm speccing. When I think about genre, when I think about cast, when I think about whatever, and I'm putting that stuff together, it's an awareness of that is, I think, useful. What was the question? I feel like I've tangented myself into oblivion over here.
It was such a good answer. I didn't want to stop. I love hearing the story about Seth and his involvement.
I'm in the middle of the story about the distribution. Okay, wait, hold on. I'm not done.
The original question was, how did you get distribution?
Yeah, so eventually we took one of the we had a few offers. We had sort of like one good offer and a couple not very good offers, and we took the good offer. Um, which was I can't tell. I'm like, I have an NDA on the details of the contract, so I will tell you that privately, but I like I can't on a podcast disclose the numbers and whatnot. But um, the basic idea was for a nominal advance. Um, that, let's put it this way, doesn't cover the costs of all the things I have to do to deliver the project, right? Because you have to do a million things if you're doing it yourself. You have to make captions, you have to have, get all the contracts together. There's a lot of paperwork that is involved, but there's also, you have to have what's called errors and omission insurance that costs thousands of dollars and probably gets you nothing, but theoretically makes it much harder for somebody to sue you if you accidentally used somebody's name and made fun of them or something like that. All kinds of things. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of rigmarole that comes with like selling a project, and you can't like fake that part. You have to do that. like, um, I don't know. Maybe if you didn't have a distributor, you could fake that part. There's lawyers and stuff and people who have to be involved in putting a lot of different assets together that are sort of administrative and make a trailer, and then your trailer needs closed captioning and a dialogue list and a music list, and so there's a lot of that kind of, and it has to go through all this QC and make sure that the project conforms to various kinds of standards, and along the way you're probably having to redo your titles several times and figuring out all these technical details. And if you're not a whole company who does this, and you're just, and like as I was in this case, it was just me by myself doing all this. It's a lot. There's a bunch of that. Um, that takes a few months. And at the end of that, it was kind of like, let's set a release date and a release strategy. I thought there would maybe be more meetings about how to do this release strategy, but I was like, hey, what about 420 weekend? This is kind of a stoner film. And they were like, love it. Okay. And that was it. And so the movie came out on Friday, April 19th.
Way to earn their money there, huh?
Yeah, I was just like, I just pitched a thing and they were like, great. And so I don't know. There was a lot like and then we were also simultaneously doing the festival, like doing a bunch of festivals, and that was great to have screenings. And through that, a friend of mine who's a producer was like, I think I could find you some extra money for marketing. People who would believe in this project and want to be in business with a Seth Green movie, would come in with money. Because again, the money just cares about, because that's the most profitable thing that a movie can offer. And it's just like, it's not subjective. It's a fact. It's this actor who has this track record or whatever. And so we got a little bit of money that they were like, we'll pay a marketing company to make and do social media ads for you. And I was like, that's great. So which was separate from the distributor. This is not a normal way to do it. That's not normally how it happens, but that's how we were able to sort of figure out we could raise some money for ads, basically sell, have a deal that sort of structures they recoup early on, but then also have some percentage of the back end in exchange for paying a bunch of money right now so that we could run ads and get people to see the film. Where we are right now is that, the movie's been out for a few months. It's on both the TVOD and now also AVOD platforms. And, people have seen it. It hasn't made a lot of money, right? And that's partly for that. I mean, there's complicated reasons why, but I think part of it is just that, like, that is a little bit where the industry is right now, where the business models on return are kind of up in the air and probably changing, and nobody really knows how you get your film to profitability. Now, we might still, because the movie costs so little money to make, right? Like, if you truly have a budget of, zero, and then it's just the costs of the release, you stand a chance to sort of figuring out long term how to recoup it. But honestly, let's say this movie had cost $350,000, because that number I'm pulling because that's what a lot of non-union TV movies budgets is right now at the low end. I don't know how to make $300,000 on any of these, because Netflix isn't buying it for that much money from you for a buyout. And you have to sell how many units on rentals on Amazon to get to that? I mean, I don't know how you would do it that way. And You certainly aren't going to make that on AVOD because you need millions of people to watch it to make that kind of money. And how are you going to get millions of people to watch your movie without spending how much money on advertisements? And then is the money you're putting in recouping it? Like that's the real question is how much do you have to spend to advertise something to maybe get it back? Like that equation, which would be golden to find out, right? Nobody has an answer to it, and it seems kind of broken at the moment. And because the technology is so new, we haven't. I don't think. I think we're years away from really catching up to a point where independent cinema has a more reliable metric for here is what a movie is worth and here are the paths to recover the budget. And so I think that makes it a very challenging time the smaller you are, right? If you're big, you still and you're doing a lot of movies, you still can kind of play by the old model, which is the studio model is let's make 20 films every year. And a few of them will be hits and make money, and the rest will be not so great or flops, and that's fine. We'll make our profit off Deadpool 3 and Inside Out 2, and that'll take care of everything else that we do. That's easier you are, the bigger you are, and harder you are, the smaller you are. And so I don't like if you're me, you have one movie. Like I don't know how if someone was like, here's $300,000 for Hanky Panky 2 if you can demonstrate any kind of plan for how you will make that money back, I'd be like, sorry, I don't fucking know. Keep it. Not interested. I mean, facetiously, but like also a little bit, I'd be like, I would sort of rack my brain. Like, what am I even going to tell them about how I could make that money back? I don't know. I don't know anybody who knows.
Is there anything that we can say to bring this part of the conversation home with a positive light? What I mean by that is you seem to me like still quite a positive person. You're still actively writing, knowing that this industry is in this particular state of confusion right now and all the things that you just mentioned. If there are writers listening to this that are feeling a bit down after hearing this amazing information and I'm sure accurate, what is it that keeps you going? And what could we share with them along those lines?
That's the right question to be asking because it's easy to get sort of spiral into the doom of like this is all nonsense. Okay, two things. One, I think the chaos is moving towards. I don't know what the timeline is. It's probably a couple years. It's probably years away. But I think we're getting to a point where there is a more stable. We're going to come to a more stable landscape of what companies are out there, where people are watching things. Both I was listening to a podcast recently. They were sort of recapping that both Tony Vinciquerra, who's the CEO of Sony, and Ari Emanuel from Endeavor, both recently have said at different conferences that we're 2 to 3 years from stability. And that seems to be a reasonable. It's frustrating, I think, from the creative perspective of like, oh, so we're in chaos for years more. But I think there's something hopeful in the sense that like the people who are sort of in the know or in the powerful sort of steering positions on the Hollywood ship are at least feeling like we're heading towards some kind of stability that will come after more mergers and sadly more consolidation, right? Like I don't think that that's a good thing, but I think that's what the powers that be seem to think is on the horizon for us, right? We're going to lose streamers, we're going to lose maybe studios, right? But at the end of the day, at least there'll be something that's a little bit more dependable because right now buyers are like, okay, last doom and gloom, and I will come back around to why the other half of this question, but like I talked to a friend of mine who's an executive at a studio who was like, we used to have 30 shows, now we have 10, and the buyers are buying less. So it's just hard right now. It's very hard to be an executive. It's much harder to be an executive right now than I think it is to be a writer because, I mean, I know executives who are just at companies that got, like Paramount Television Studios, it's just gone. They closed it unexpectedly a couple weeks ago. Like, and there are more and more layoffs coming. So I like that makes the landscape really tough. But it also seems like maybe this is a storm, and once we weather it, on the other side of it, there will be more buying of movies and television shows, right? And when there is, and it'll be There'll be a world, right? It's coming. I don't know what the timeline is. The other thing is that between the strikes sort of put a pause on everything, and so they're only now the studios are catching up on like, well, we had all these things that we had already developed and we couldn't make them during the strike, so now they're making those. It's been about almost a year since the strike, so it's like, okay, now the pipeline is getting cleansed again. And the pipeline had already been backed up by the pandemic and then the strike, so it's like, all right, there is a horizon somewhere as early as 2025, as late as 2028, where there is a stable, healthy film industry once more, right? And the optimism that, like, in the meantime, all these places still do need, like, some stuff is getting made. They need some stuff. Like, the optimism that I have is that, like, I don't know, like, there is still, like, it's crazy and it's chaotic, but maybe, I don't know, chaos is a ladder a little bit. Like, nobody knows what the fuck is getting sold or bought. So, like, maybe I can beat the odds and sell something. And maybe I'm crazy and delusional, but there is this feeling of, like, I don't know, if I'm in the right place at the right time with the right script, maybe I can get something made. Like, there's something, but there's a pessimistic or an optimistic way of looking at the fact that huge names right now are having trouble selling things.
And the massive disruption that's causing that, and rises of things like user-generated content and AI. I feel the same way. It is, in some ways, troubling, and it's throwing away a lot of traditional models. But anytime you do that, you create new pathways, and that's exciting. And we don't quite see what those pathways are yet, but we're starting to, and to your point, right place, right time is always going to be a thing. And the odds are not high, but they never were. So if it's another 2 to 3 years of this, okay, I'll take those odds, keep going, and then we see some degree of stabilization within the industry, and then it becomes a bit more predictable as it ever has been, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the other optimistic thing is that it's like, well, look, if you're a writer, you can just make something. Like, frankly, if you're anything, you can get something made if you just make it yourself. Like, Hanky Panky was just me and my friends. We shot this thing with nobody. I mean, anybody could do that. Now it's on Apple and Amazon and Tubi.
Anybody with a group of friends that don't mind doing a couple of days, weeks, maybe for free in a cabin in the middle of nowhere.
I think you could find you could find people to do that now. Like, if everybody's really out of work, then we're all out of work together, you know? And so,
actors want to work. That's something that I do know because I am one. Actors want to work, and no, it's not ideal to reach out and say, hey, could you do this for free?
It sucks, but what are you going to do?
But people want to be on set, being creative, having a good time, and maybe a nominal fee if you can. If not, there's other arrangements you can make. This is a big thing for me right now, is how can I actually be more creative outside of just writing? How can I actually be creating things? It's one of the reasons I do the podcast. I mean, this isn't super creative in terms of production value, but it still ticks the box in so many ways for me. I'm still making content and sharing it, and that feels good.
Yeah. I mean, and if you are a writer, no one can stop you from writing, right? Really. Like, you can still be specking. You can always be specking. Always be specking, right? Like
ABS.
Yeah, ABS. Always be specking. I cannot be in the first million sort of made that joke, but like, you can.
I've never heard.
You can always be writing new things.
Yeah, yeah,
and that's valuable too.
I think that's a great place to leave this part of the conversation, because that was an upswing at the end. Not that I want to force positivity. If there is none, let's just be realists about this. Yeah. But I do agree with what you were saying about it's still a good time to be a writer, to focus on craft, focus on getting stuff made in your own way, learning about other elements of the industry, definitely.
But I will say this, every single person out there selling the snake oil of like, here's how to get staffed on a TV show right now, or come join my seminar where I'm going to teach you how to sell your script, even if you're not repped. And I see that shit that gets advertised to me all the time because I'm always talking about scripts. So my algorithms all feed those ads to me.
Yes.
I know they're out there. That's all bullshit. Nobody do it. I feel like every single one of those is now irrelevant and obsolete, and
Yeah.
everyone should run in the opposite direction of anybody. The way that I like to think about it is it's like, and anytime anyone asks me, like, how do I break into the industry right now? Is there like, I feel like people are like, you're standing outside a building that is on fire and somebody is telling you about a side entrance they know. And it's like, the point is not which door or if there's a door in, because the problem is that the building is on fire. So either help put the fire out or don't go in, right? Like anybody who's having the conversation about how to break in is missing the fact that the building is on fire. That is my feeling.
There's a YouTube short right there, 60 seconds of Nick Roth talking about the building being on fire. I love
It
it.
is on fire. It is on fire. It is crumbling. It will probably be fine, but not right now.
Right. Let's switch gears. We are at the point of the show where you get to ask me a question. Ask the life coach. There still needs to be some kind of jingle at that point. I haven't figured it out yet, but at least some kind of transition, maybe. I want to pick people's brains and have them do the same to me and bring some coaching to the podcast. So I asked you if you could ask a life coach any question, kind of connected to what we've been talking about in the episode. What would that question be? And your question, well, do you want to go ahead and do you have the question written down in front of you? I have it here, but I could let
I
you.
I know it, but I can segue it from what we were talking about it, because it
Ooh, I
was
love a
really
good
pointed
segue.
on when I was, when you're doing independent film, you I'll frequently end up doing a lot of jobs that you are doing for the first time. Like you do sometimes everything, right? And especially when it comes to stuff that's outside my comfort zone, like distribution, like marketing, like all this stuff that I had never had to do before, I felt like I was like very frequently in a place of trying to figure out whether this was something I could do myself or this is something I have to trust an expert who does this for a living, who does this and knows what they're talking about. How are we going to market this film? What will the campaign look like? When should we do this? Whatever it is, right? There was a million of these times. I find that it's particularly hard for me to be like, do I really know best on everything? And like, how do I, I'm uncomfortable in that situation where I'm like, does this person know what they're talking about? How do I know whether they know what they're talking about? I know I don't, and I can't possibly be an expert in things, but I don't like trusting other people to do them because sometimes I'm like, if you want to do something right, just do it yourself. And I feel like, but then sometimes I feel like, or am I being, is it, is it egomaniacal to be thinking that way sometimes? So I find myself, in the process of a lot of these parts, and this is throughout film, right? Um, how do you, like, what do you do? Like, help me figure out when I'm supposed to trust others versus when I'm supposed to be like, no, this is my creative vision, or I have the biggest stake in the game, so I'm gonna just do this myself.
Yeah, it's a great question, and a giant caveat to start with. There's no easy answer to it, and it's different on different occasions. Of course, the way I approach it is I would sort of think about, okay, what are the two sides of this? So, what do I have? Is it kind of a gut feeling, or is it something that I could prove? And then I would look at the expert. Let's just use that word for now. And I would evaluate both. So my gut feeling, and I would go all sciencey because I like to do that, and I would think about, well, my gut instinct is really just a collection of experiences I've had over the years that are being processed subconsciously and generating what feels like a hunch, but it's actually this brain gut connection that we have going on. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I would rationalize by talking to myself in that way. But what it would come down to is, do I actually have direct experience of this thing that I'm about to do? Because if not, what's happening on again, that biological level, or neurological in this case, is I'm filling in blanks. My brain is processing close enough information to predict what's going to happen in the future. So it feels like a strong instinct, but it could be misplaced. Now, on the other hand, if I have a stack of experience, then I can probably trust my gut on this thing. So if it was me making a decision about marketing, I'm likely to believe myself, even if I'm up against another marketing expert, like I'm an expert, but somebody else who's telling me to do something differently. Because it's marketing, I would trust me. However, if it was something like financing a movie, I've already said on this podcast episode, I'm an idiot. I might think I know how that's going to go based on this hunch that I have, but that's coming from similar situations I've been in the past because my brain is trying to fill that vacuum because it doesn't want to be an idiot. So then I would look at the expert and I would really dive deep into what they mean when they say that they are an expert. So do they have a proven track record with what they're doing? And I would be really specific. In your case with the movie, have you distributed a comedy horror movie that was super low budget? Have you made an ROI on that? Have you made money back on it? If so, show me the case study. Show me the actual details of how you did that. Show me the metrics, right? Everything is digital marketing nowadays. And the huge advantage there is everything is trackable. So if somebody can't prove to you that they've done this, then they're probably full of shit. Or they're at least exaggerating to a degree where that trust is going to go down. It's going to go away, right? Because why don't you have evidence? We live in a digital age. You should be able to prove that you're very good at this. Now, there's kind of that gray area where I trust myself a little bit and I've had some experience in this, and they're not maybe the experts like top of the field, but they've got some experience and they seem to know what they're doing. And I think that's where most of us live. The other two extremes, they're easy to talk about, but most of it is going to lie in that awkward gray area where it's like, I know a bit about this. They seem to know a bit about this. So the way I would approach that would be two things can be true. And if it's possible, it might not always be. But if it's possible, I would look at it as probably going to put like 80% of my trust and my money and my time, whatever's on the table, into the people who have done this actual thing before. And then I'm going to take about 20% of it and just go have fun with it in my way. Track that, see what happens. If it starts working, then I've got data to send over to this company and say, hey, I just did this thing for myself on social media and it seemed to really work. Maybe you should try something like this. So I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be a binary thing. Maybe in certain circumstances, they might say, look, we're going to handle all of this for you and you're not allowed to go and do anything on your own. But I highly doubt that because any efforts you put in on your own is going to benefit them as well, right? So it's kind of like investing. If you want to invest smartly, you probably put at least 80% of your money into something that's very stable and not dramatic. And then you take 20%, go have fun, buy some Bitcoin, do some day trading. You probably lose some, win some, blah, blah, blah. But it's okay because you're just testing it out. That's the way that I would think about it. I don't know if that's specific to the situation that you were in. There might be some caveats there that we couldn't have really done that. But in general, that's how I would think through the situation. Am I really an expert? What's my this thing I call my gut feeling? What is that made up of? Do I have the experiences or am I just filling in blanks? And then what's their actual experience? Have they done close enough exactly what I'm asking them to do, and can they prove it? Yeah, that's how I would think through it. How much does that, scale of 1 to 10, how much does that help with well, I guess you've already done the situation that you were in. So
there's not a specific situation I have in mind. I just literally I find it in the process of independent filmmaking, especially I'm thinking of Hanky Panky.
It comes up a lot. Yeah.
It comes up so much. It comes up when you're bringing on crew, when you're casting, anytime you're bringing a new person on to help you with your project or whatever, you do this a little bit. And then I guess it's just it came up for me so much around the question of distribution because this was the first time I really ever got to that stage of the game. And then all of a sudden it's there's all of these new things. And I had just had to learn so many new things because I did all the post-production of Hanky Panky. I did the color myself. And I had to get over that hump of like, I don't know, like finding a real colorist is gonna do the best for my movie. And then, but at some point I was like, well, what if I just start coloring it and see what happens? And I was like, oh, I think it looks pretty good. All right, I'll color the whole movie. And then so I did the color. And it's like, would the movie look better if someone who really knew what they were doing and had colored a movie before was the colorist?
Well,
Probably.
the other question
But
with
at
that
some
is,
point I
would
had to make the
anybody in
decision to do
the
that.
audience notice? With
Well,
coloring, that's maybe a handful of people may have noticed, but I certainly
you know,
thought it looked great.
I just like I feel like I got it as far as like I made it look fine, but like I because I could have paid somebody a couple grand who was better than me to do it, and I was like, nah, I'll do it myself. And there's a million times you make decisions like that, and then you're like, now I got to go watch Google YouTube videos or whatever on like how to do this thing that I don't want, like I have no interest in, but I need to learn how to do this. And at a certain point, there was like I did that a lot of times because I did the sound myself, and I had to do the distribution myself, and I did the reaching out to distributor, like all of that part, like it's just very hard to know when to draw the line, right? And I think you're right, and that's how you have to sort of like talk through it and like think through the questions of like, okay, well now I have this. Am I going to go with this marketing company or this marketing company, or am I going to just do the marketing myself? And a lot of like in film in the distribution world, a lot of people talk to you about a lot of things in language that you don't know unless you know what I mean? Just like, well, we know how to target the right audiences with the ads, and we know how to do this, and we know how to do that. And I don't know if they do or don't. I still don't know. Like
They're just throwing big words at you.
maybe it's hard, and maybe it just at a certain point you get exhausted of having to always be, you know, you see why people fall back on like, man, the studio system is annoying, but just having a studio that this is all they do. This is all they do. And
Yeah, you just write the script,
and their project and
everybody else takes it from there.
And your interests are aligned. You know what I mean? Just having if your interests are aligned, great. You know? But I think there are times in independent film, one of the challenges is that there's a lot of people who have to collaborate and they don't necessarily have perfectly aligned interests, right?
Yes,
and so
definitely.
I guess that's just another way of thinking about it. It's like, hey, when do
It's an
I just do everything myself?
ongoing challenge for anybody creative. I just did an episode yesterday with a good friend of mine. We were talking about how many skills should you acquire? At what point does it become a distraction?
That is, that's another way of I'm saying that's another way of asking the same thing I'm asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you should check out that episode when it comes out.
I will.
Nick, this has been great. I'm going to bring it home. Where can people go if they want to follow you or engage more with Hanky Panky? We'll link some stuff in the description for you.
HankyPankyTheMovie.com for all things Hanky Panky, because that then has all of the links to everywhere that it's streaming and everything you could ever possibly dream of. And for me, you just find me on LinkedIn, which is the only social media platform for Nick Roth.
I love it. We will link that in the description for sure.
It's the best. It's the best because you waste no time on it. There's nothing I want to see on LinkedIn.
You don't scroll through everybody's posts that all start with "I'm thrilled to announce."
The LinkedIn news feed is I have so much appreciation for how much I don't care about anything that's ever been posted on it in human history. So and because of that, I don't waste any time. Every year they give me another month of a free trial. I've never spent a dime on LinkedIn. I literally got a job. This script consultancy was just some people reached out on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best. I'm angling for a free LinkedIn for life pro membership. But the pro membership doesn't get you anything anyway. Who cares? LinkedIn's the best.
I was hoping that they would sponsor this podcast at some point because I talk about them a lot. I may have to edit out the bit where you say you don't care about anything that's ever been published.
I'm the worst spokesperson for LinkedIn, except that I truly love it. It truly is the only one I use. I am not on any of the other platforms. I love LinkedIn. So
I do as well.
Partly because it's so boring and
doesn't distract you at all. Me. Hey, it's a professional platform and we keep it that way on purpose. All right, Nick, this has been great, and part 3 in the next few months, probably.
Amazing.
All right, dude. Take care.
I'm always here to share all of the things I've learned on other podcasts on this podcast.
Honestly, that's all I'm doing when I host these things. So we're in that together. Yeah. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Right. Thanks.